It's important to understand the context of that time period. When you think about the Civil War, this really was it's the most transformative event in American history. Um, you have literally a new country after the Civil War is over. There's a revolution in a sense that we now have 4 million African Americans that were formerly slaves and now freed. It really redefines what it means to be a citizen in this country. Um, and so we think of the Civil War, I think, a lot today as this war over the issue of slavery. And it, of course, was. Without slavery, there is no war. But it's important to remember after the Civil War was over, it doesn't necessarily get remembered that way. There was a conscious effort on both sides of the war, North and South, to kind of diminish the importance of the issue of slavery in the war in order to put the country back together. And that's not what happens here in Fitchburg. And the Civil War Monument really does embody exactly what it is that the people of Fitchburg were fighting for, what the war meant to them at the time, but most importantly, how it is that they wanted the war to be remembered for generations to come, not for decades later, but for generations to come, hundreds of years later, like we are now. And for them, it is a war about both preserving the United States of America, that institution that was put together by the Founding Fathers in the Revolutionary War. And it also is to be remembered as a war to abolish slavery. One of the things that most people don't know about Civil War monuments is that, according to historian Thomas Brown, less than 5% of all Northern monuments unequivocally announced the abolition of slavery as a Northern War goal. So that's really a small number when you think about it. And that speaks again to this idea that both sides were trying to whitewash the idea that the war was really about ending slavery in order to put the country back together. Fitchburg's Soldiers Monument happens to be one of those that's in that less than 5%. I think that speaks volumes about how it is that the people of Fitchburg wanted the war to be remembered. The quote on the monument states very clearly that it was a war to preserve the Republic of the United States, and it was fought for the freedom of an oppressed race, which obviously speaks to the 4 million slaves that were freed as a result of the Northern victory in the Civil War. And this was a huge deal for Fitchburg. I mean, this was a really, really big event. The planning of the monument takes 12 years, actually. 1 year into the war, in 1862, April of 1862, plans were already underway to establish some sort of monument or some sort of memorial to those people from Fitchburg that fought and died. Unfortunately, due to a number of delays and some controversy about how best it was to honor those soldiers that died, the monument doesn't get dedicated until June of 1874. To understand that this was not just those people that had political power, or those wealthy people in the community that wanted to put their stamp on Civil War memory here in Fitchburg, and that it really was a community effort, and that the community was wholeheartedly behind the development of the Civil War Soldiers Monument and what it stood for. Of the $77,000 that it cost to build a monument, nearly $66,000 came from tax dollars. So that would tell you, tells me anyways, that the community and the public was certainly behind this effort to not only honor those soldiers that died in the Civil War from Fitchburg, but to honor their memory and what it is that they fought for. The fact that the Civil War Soldiers Monument in Fitchburg recognizes or overtly identifies the war as a war to abolish slavery in the United States shouldn't really come as a surprise if you understand the history of abolitionism here in Fitchburg. Fitchburg literally was a hotbed of anti-slavery activity in the 1830s and 1840s. And it is those people really that are behind this push to make sure that the Civil War does clearly identify, that the Soldiers' Monument does clearly identify the war as being one that was fought to abolish slavery. Benjamin Snow, who was a very prominent abolitionist here in Fitchburg, and also a founding member of the Trinitarian Church, which was established in 1843 for the sole purpose of fighting to abolish slavery. He was a member of the Calvinistic Congregational Church prior to that, and he and other members of the Calvinistic Church were unhappy with the idea that their church and their pastor had not come out with a fervent condemnation of slavery. So they decided that with the Calvinistic Church's permission, that they would start the Trinitarian Church for the sole purpose, again, of abolishing slavery. Also, Benjamin Snow was very well connected, as were other people in Fitchburg, with some of the most prominent abolitionists in the country. To name a few, William Lloyd Garrison, who was of course the founder of the Liberator, the anti-slavery newspaper out of Boston. He visited Fitchburg frequently. Frederick Douglass was perhaps the most recognizable abolitionist in the country at that time. He spent time here in Fitchburg. He spoke here in Fitchburg, spent time at the Snow House. Angelina and Sarah Grimke, again, notable abolitionists that spent time here in Fitchburg. Theodore Weld, as well as many others. So it's not, if you know a little bit about the history of the abolitionist movement in Fitchburg, it shouldn't come as a big surprise that the Soldiers' Monument certainly expressed those abolitionist views. That's the way that the people of Fitchburg wanted the war to be remembered in the middle and late 1800s, but more importantly, that's how they wanted the Civil War to be remembered for generations later. And when the dedication comes up in June of 1874, it is a really, really big deal. There are thousands of people that gather here in Fitchburg for the dedication. The keynote speaker was General Nathaniel P. Banks, who was an anti-Civil War general. He was the former Speaker of the United States House of Representatives and somebody that fought alongside those soldiers from Fitchburg in the Civil War. So when he's asked if he would be willing to be a part of the dedication ceremony, he's more than happy to do it. And he speaks to not only the heroics of those Fitchburg soldiers, especially those ones that died, but he also speaks again about the purpose of the war, the meaning of the war, and the memory of the war, which of course to them was a memory, not just only to preserve the United States of America, but also, very important to them, that this monument represented for generations to come that this was a war to end the evil institution of slavery in the United States. I think most people, when they walk by the monument, they may look and say, "Wow, that's a beautiful park," or what a stunning monument that is. But I think, there's very few that will actually go up and read the inscription on the monument that clearly states that the people of Fitchburg wanted to honor those soldiers that died in the Civil War fighting for the preservation of the United States and the abolition of slavery. But there's a lot of history on that monument, a lot of history on that spot. There's a lot of history in that park that goes beyond just the fighting of the Civil War. It goes deep into the roots of what Fitchburg was all about at that time. It goes deep into the roots of the abolitionist movement, just not only right here in central Massachusetts, but throughout the nation. And that's something that the people of Fitchburg, when they decided to erect this monument and when they dedicated this monument, that's what they wanted all of us to remember hundreds of years later. And so if we can do that as a community and put the real meaning of the Civil War Soldiers Monument in Fitchburg back in the spotlight, we can honor what it is, not only what those soldiers from Fitchburg died for, but also what the community wanted us to remember about who they were and what the Civil War was all about.
I'm very pleased as well to talk to you about the current district court in Fitchburg, which occupies the space of the former United States Post Office. That building was constructed originally in 1903, and the construction was in the Beaux-Arts style, and basically was the front half of the building. If you look at the building from the front, there's a section that juts out on the side, and that, going back, was the addition to the building that was built during the Depression as part of the WPA program to give people work. And they expanded the federal post office at that time. I was especially pleased to work in that building for 26 years as the presiding judge in the Fitchburg District Court. And I'm a native of Fitchburg, and I was born in the Lucy Helen Hospital, and my first home for 10 years was on Central Street, which is the next street beyond the courthouse, a very small street that runs to the right. And so when I would walk to school at Immaculate Conception School every day, we used to walk to school in those days, I would walk by the post office, and never dreaming that one day I would work in that building. It was especially interesting because there are a series of windows that look into the basement, and it was where some of the mail sorting took place. And as kids, we used to creep up to the window and peek in and watch the mail being sorted. The building was abandoned by the federal government in the mid-1970s. There was a movement to construct a new post office in Fitchburg, and that post office was constructed near the Upper Common and is currently in use today. It's a very large brick building. The federal government abandoned that building and placed it on the list of buildings that could be obtained by different governmental agencies. The rule was that it was offered to government agencies in order of precedence. The state was offered the building first, the county was offered the building next, and then the city was offered the building finally. The exception to the rule was that if one of the municipalities offered an amount for the building, then the higher government would have to pay that amount. and couldn't get it for just $1. So they went through the process, and the mayor of Fitchburg at that time thought that that building would make a great senior citizen center and other municipal functions. And he offered to pay $80,000 for the building. And that meant that the county, which wanted to take the building for a courthouse, had to pay $80,000 if they wanted to take the building for a courthouse. In those days, the counties were in charge of building all the courthouses and running the court system, unlike today when the state does all of that. So out of the budget allocation for the construction of the courthouse had to come the money to pay the government. Later, the mayor obtained the state armory, and he didn't offer any money for it. He just got it for the dollar, the traditional dollar. So what happened in our case was that we had to reduce our budget by that amount, and that meant we didn't have money to furnish the building. His history is very interesting when seen in the context of a larger issue that loomed after the Civil War. After the Civil War, the citizens of Fitchburg determined that they wanted to have their own county. And for several years, legislation was introduced to split off northern Worcester County and parts of Middlesex County, western Middlesex County. They had a county name already selected. It was going to be Lincoln County, and Fitchburg was going to be the county seat. Unfortunately, there was a great deal of opposition, both from Middlesex County and from Worcester County. And so ultimately they arrived at a grand compromise. The compromise was this. First of all, they would declare that Fitchburg was a shire town. A shire town stems from the Old English system and basically meant that it was a seat of government, and more particularly, a seat of county government. So by declaring it as a shire town, Fitchburg was then able to have many benefits of county government offices. Fitchburg also obtained a Superior Court building, and this is the current Superior Court building that exists. They obtained a sitting of the probate court once a week for the probate of estates and for divorce actions and the like. They obtained a county law library, which was in the building. They obtained, at a little later date, a registry of deeds, and certain cities and towns in the northern area were carved out so that Fitchburg became the place where they would file their deeds and the like. That was pretty much the extent of the compromise, but it did give Fitchburg almost parity with Worcester as a government operation. Oh, in addition to that, the county treasurer had an office in the Superior Court building. There's an interesting little Ripley's Believe It or Not cartoon that shows the four corners of that intersection, the intersection of Wallace Avenue and Elm Street. And at the time, the post office was a federal building, the armory was a state building, the Superior Court building was a county building, and the park was a municipal building. And Ripley's Believe It or Not, if you can believe it, said that it was the only place in the United States where there were each of the 4 branches of government represented at one intersection. So that's a very brief history of a very wonderful old building. And those of us who worked there on a daily basis and who tried cases there and who worked in the Registry of Deeds are